Uh, Brilliant. Well, yes, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Nigel. That was quite the introduction. Yes, so as Nigel said, I used to be part of the Bangor scene for many years. It does seem like a long time ago now. I graduated in 2021, but I keep popping up every now and then, and that's partly due to my girlfriend here on the right-hand side, who's got family just down in the Glen Conway region. So I'm still visiting North Wales when I can. Um, so yes, this trip is, as I said, based on Spain, but a part of Spain that I don't feel enough people visit, and I'm going to quickly just go across. So this is just a screenshot taken from eBird, and I'll go through that later on throughout this talk. But this talk is based more on the northeastern side of Spain, specifically just south of Barcelona, and then going inland to the steppe region. So this will, hopefully, if you can see my cursor, this was meant to be a week-long trip where we landed in Barcelona and then we spent 3 or 4 days around the Ebro Delta. So I heard when everyone was getting ready into this talk, someone mentioned about the Danube. This is a slightly smaller delta than the Danube, but still one of the most important in Europe, especially from migratory birds using that western corridor throughout Europe. And this then splits into, as I said, into three parts. So into the Ebro Delta, and then as my girlfriend came with, she thankfully has family just inland from the Ebro Delta. So there was a bit of family time in the middle, meeting grandparents and whatever. And then we split it up by heading north towards Lleida, which is just in the foothills and the steppe region before the Pyrenees, before coming back into Barcelona. So just a deeper dive into the Ebro Delta, and you can see how the river Ebro flows right the way through the centre. And this is a river that originates up near Santander region in Spain. So it cuts across right through the foothills of the Pyrenees, and it spits itself out here in the Mediterranean. So apart from one major town in the centre, the delta is, as you can see, covered with what looks to be quite agricultural land. And a lot of these they're almost rice paddies. Well, rice paddy is probably not the correct word to use for this region, but this area produces a lot of rice. And what that means is in the winter, they've all been dried out and they've been seeded, these fields, and then they get flooded, and that's where all the birds come in. So our idea was to go here, see an amazing spectacle, see all these flooded fields, and just watch the waders and all the spring birds piling through into Spain. And what I didn't mention actually is we're visiting this region of Spain at the end of March and into the start of April, so just at the start of migration. I just mentioned that we wanted to see flooded fields and loads of birds in them. We get to our accommodation and this is what we see. It's completely bone dry. We'd actually mistimed it by a week or two. So these fields here should be at least flooded, and there should be glossy ibis, white storks, herons and egrets all in it. What you can see at the back here is two separate mountain ranges, and there's one to the left is more important, and I'll get onto that later, but that's the Els Port National Park, some of the highest mountains in the Catalonia region outside of the Pyrenees. But from this room, or our balcony, even though it was quite dry, we were still seeing marsh harriers. Just around the corner was a lovely reserve where green sandpipers were absolutely everywhere, and spoonbill. And if anyone else is birding in the Mediterranean, it's very much like if you've gone to the Somerset levels but on steroids. It's 25 squawker herons, 50 cattle egrets. You go around the corner, it's the same again. Loads of swamp hens, black-winged stilts, everything we'd love to see in the UK and especially in North Wales. And it wouldn't go amiss without mentioning these two species. So glossy ibis. I've actually just recently come back from this region on a Zeiss work trip at the end of September, where at one site we estimated that there was 30,000 glossy ibis coming into roost. And this was around the same time actually that there was that huge eruption in the UK going on. And this region does really well for glossy ibis because of these paddy fields I've mentioned. So when these fields are flooded, there's loads of invertebrates, and there's actually quite a lot of crayfish. I'm not sure on the actual species of crayfish, but that attracts the ibis, the herons, and the storks. But there are also several salt pans, and away from Seville and other regions like that down in southern Spain, This is one of the best places to see greater flamingo. Annoyingly quite hard to photograph, actually, because normally your camera focuses on this area of the bird and not on the head, so it focuses on the wing. But when Charlotte and I visited here, I had a few targets that I wanted to see. This was going to be Charlotte's first proper birding trip abroad, so she gave me a list of about 50 species she wanted to see without doing too much research into the region of Spain, wanting to see the likes of marbled and white-headed duck, which sadly we don't get in that northeast corner of Spain. But one of the species high on both our lists was Order-winged gull, and they were 10 a penny, and this was quite helpful with using eBird. I will move on. I'll talk about that, as I've already said, later on. But this is a bird that I've always wanted to see, and you've always had rumours in the UK of one turns up for a day. I think there was a bird in Sheffield that turned up for an afternoon, and that was it more recently. But just a really, really stunning gull. And I'll be honest, gulls normally bore me, bore me to death, unless there's a bit of rarity to them. But these were stunning with their bright red bills and that lovely eye and just a really nice pale head to them. And the beauty of birding around this area is you can do a lot of it by your car. So in both of these, there's an Order-winged gull sat on a post, and one also sat on another post. And as you can see, the weather was absolutely gorgeous for the end of March, start of April. We were looking at about 25, 26 degrees each day. Whilst back here in the UK, it was probably how it is now. A bit cold, a bit bitterly, and typical British weather. These Order-winged gulls definitely became one of my favourite species of the whole trip, allowing for some really good views. No chips were needed for views like this. They seemed quite tame, for a better word to put it. But also there were a few nesting colonies nearby. And Order-winged gull as a breeding species in Europe is actually vulnerable due to many reasons, including habitat loss. So this population around the Ebro Delta is very keen. The locals are very keen to keep it going. As you see, this bird on the left here is colour ringed, and it quite often breeds around the Ebro Delta, and actually, instead of heading south in the winter, it heads north and it sticks around Barcelona ferry port, which is probably the best place for it. But I haven't really spoken to or given you a proper representation of what the Delta should be like. And for anyone who's been, there's one key place, and that's the David Briggis Tower. So this gives you a fantastic overview of what the Delta should be like when it's completely flooded. So you can see the mountain ranges at the back that I'd already mentioned, but this reserve is right on, what you can't see here is just behind me is the coast, but this is just filled and filled with reed beds. So what you can see is there's groups of flamingos here, there's a couple egrets, there's probably some stilts in the middle if you zoomed in on these photos. But one bird that I'd seen briefly elsewhere, but wanted to have very good views of, were little bitten. We timed this very well for knowing some species would be starting to sing and they'd be showing very well. We arrived at this site, we could hear Savvy's warblers singing everywhere, Sardinian warblers, western subalpines, melodious warblers were going at it, as well as a couple moustache warblers and blue throats. Whilst there was a distant osprey flying over the sea, and Charlotte turns around to me and goes, "Oh, what was that odd sound that came from below us?" And we literally looked down from us where we were at the tower, and there was a little bitten, actually sat right next to our car, annoyingly, happily just feeding away and singing. Sadly, a car drove past pretty quickly after and flushed it, but what that meant is that we could run down quickly and grab a quick photo. A species I've actually never seen very well, and by far this male sat out for about 10 minutes. No care in the world. This was taken at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And he was more than happy to just sit out in the open. And two of the species that were very prevalent are around the entire Ebro Delta. Penduline tits, or Eurasian penduline tits, and I'm not sure this might cause a bit of debate in the group here, but sitting cisticola, or fan-tailed warbler is what they're called. This was actually a lifer for me, a bird I hadn't seen anywhere before, and I was very keen to see it, but quickly got bored of this quite dull, dull-looking wren-like reed-inhabited species. And since then, I've seen them in Lesvos later on this year, and went down to Suffolk to see where they bred, just north of Minsmit, ironically, where the views weren't very good at all. But these are species that were just littered across the whole site, because even where the flooded rice paddies were, they were intersected by reed beds. and it just perfect habitat for species like these. And you can do a lot of this just by driving your car for 10-15 minutes and you get to a new spot. I've mentioned great white egret. It's a lovely bird in breeding conditions. You can see like that around the lores, nice and blue, and the bill and the leg colour as well. Just something we don't normally see with great white egrets here, unless you're in places such as Suffolk or Somerset. This is one bird of a roosting flock of about 150, and we were quite impressed at 150 great white egrets. We then went somewhere else the following evening and had 500 great white egrets. So I'm sure that'll be scenes we'll be seeing soon in the UK, never know, maybe at Corsdigger. But they're just littered everywhere. The good thing about this whole site was anywhere you went on the Delta, it was everything you'd love to see here in the UK. They were just everywhere, abundant. One bird I'm sure many birders would love to see again, because it hasn't happened for a while, would be the purple chicken, or these western swamp hens. Surprisingly skittish, but quite often you'd walk along any path along the reed beds and they'd just be flying out left, right and centre with their quite weird calls as they were going at it. At this one site we had about 30 birds, and here's two separate individuals. I suspect this bird on the right was actually a second-year bird molting into its first year with some breeding colours, because there was a little bit of juvenile feathers on the back of the nape, for example. You might be able to see around this region. But we were soon really comfortable with seeing all these species. And when we started on the plane over, we were wondering how many species we were going to see on this trip. And I tried to keep quite conservative. Charlotte was like, oh, we'll see 100 species in a week. And I was like, no, we'll definitely do better than that. We'll go with 130. By the end of our second day, we'd already hit 100 species and we still had 5 days to go. And that's including, we still need to go and visit the top of the mountains and a steppe region. So my estimate at 130 had blown completely out of the water, and we just left it to see, right, we're going to hit this target and we'll see where we end up, because it's going to be even better than what we thought. But it wasn't just birding during the day. Even when we went to the local Lidl store, we realised, oh, there's a roosting flock of cattle egrets there. So we stuck around, and it got to like 9 o'clock, and watching about 350 cattle egrets pile into this small little pond next to the main highway on the Delta. And then suddenly what we thought, well, Charlotte thought we were a load of dogs barking at first. And annoyingly, I've actually got some sound here, but it's we tried it earlier, it's not been working. But black-crowned night herons came out to roost. And as these 350 cattle egrets piled in, 50 black-crowned night herons flew out. And we didn't really see any more for the rest of the trip, because we'd had our fill. Obviously a species within their name that is more nocturnal. They'll roost during the day, and then they'll go and feed out at night, where other species aren't going to be competing for the same food source. But just fantastic to see. And if anyone's heard that, it's almost like a dog crossed with like a frog's croaking. But seeing so many birds flying out of roost, not only adults, but clearly second-year birds. Again, I visited back here in September, and a very similar scene again, but they were interspersed with some juveniles as well, so they've had a good breeding season. And then Scops out. I should have done a little introduction before showing this photo. A species I was very keen to see. I've heard them, but not seen them very well. And when we arrived on the Delta, the weather was quite windy, so we had to wait a few nights for the weather to calm down. But we could already hear Scops owls. So in this little coastal town where we were staying, we went for a walk around. I had my Zeiss thermal. I'd have to throw Zeiss in there somewhere, and a torch, and just went around trying to find some Scops owls. There was no need to play any calls or do any kind of playback. These birds were very happily being territorial and calling away. Just in this small coastal town of about 300 or 400 residents, so maybe even a big village, we had 9 different Scops owls calling, and this bird in particular showed very well. A bit of photo editing to make it look much nicer than it originally was. But knowing that this bird was around, we were also hearing other owl species such as long-eared owl, little owls, and we even had a bittern. We were scanning along the edge of a reed bed, and a bittern flew up out of the reeds. And whilst I could see it in the thermal, Charlotte couldn't see it, so I quickly had to put the torch on, and all you could see was this bittern flying away. And that'd be the only one we saw for the whole trip, despite the enormous area of reed bed we were seeing. It was just almost too much area to even try and find a scaup owl, a bittern. So the following morning, knowing that this scaup owl was in this coastal section of, it was mostly eucalyptus trees, we decided, right, let's go and find this bird roosting. That'll be a challenge. And so we took the thermal, but if anyone has used, or equally if they haven't used a thermal, it's obviously all about collecting heat and registering that through a digital image for you to see. But as soon as you point a thermal imaging device, let's say there's a scaup owl in a tree, and you point the thermal up, especially if there's not many leaves on the tree, the thermal imager will trigger and it will register the heat of the sky, which is obviously going to be freezing cold, and the tree in comparison is going to be boiling hot. So that makes the tree look really big, but then you lose the contrast of if there is any birds, like this owl. So it didn't become very useful using a thermal to actually find a scaup owl in a tree, especially when you're looking up. If you're looking at across and you could still have the horizon in your view, you had a much better chance. So we had about an hour's search, and eventually I found it. And this bird, you can actually tell, has only got one ear tuft. We even went back the second day, and he was still sat in the same tree. Clearly, by this stage, he was a little bit annoyed with us. On both occasions during the day, we only stayed with the bird for a few minutes just to get some photos, and then we left him be. And when I went back in September, I thought, you know what, let's go and see if this bird is still here. And lo and behold, in the exact same tree, very similar to this pose, I should have actually added a photo for comparison. I have the bird was showing, and anyone who's follows me on social media will have seen posts about that. I'd already alluded that we'd also heard long-eared owls in this coastal bit of scrub. And whilst I'd taken some photos of this scaup owl, so on the left-hand side here, you can see Charlotte. But that red circle is where that scaup owl was. Whilst I was taking photos, Charlotte was saying, it's got to be a long-eared round. And she'd spent 10 minutes or whatever walking around, checking the trees, trying to find her long-eared. She's like, can't find it, but I've just got a gut feeling there's one here. I was like, yeah, no worries, we'll have a bit of a scan, we've got some time. I decided to basically walk around from exactly where we were, look in the next few trees, and you might have already seen it. There was a long-eared owl roosting less than 5 minutes away from this this Eurasian scaup owl, which gave us some fantastic views, which I'll go on to. But whilst we were taking photos of it, if you can see my cursor, I tried to move behind the tree just because of where the light was to get a nicer image. And I suddenly feel something hit the back of my head, and I can't see it in this photo, and I have no photos which show where it was, but there was actually a second long-eared owl, and despite checking the area originally before moving myself, I couldn't find this bird. So he clearly tucked it in. I think there's a really dark conifer at the back here, or small coniferous plant, and I think he'd been roosting in that, and I just hadn't seen it, and it clipped the back of my head, went round the corner, sat out in the open for a bit, and then we left both birds to it, because I didn't mean to disturb that bird absolutely at all. And this individual, he was happy just staying in that tree. And to show you the views that you got, so this bird had no issue with us being within a couple of meters of it. We kept our distance where possible. And especially when you see things like this in the UK, you just don't get views like this. Unless you're in Lincolnshire at one or two specific sites and you look from a hide and they're off roosting to the side. So to get views like this was fantastic, and the owls were definitely starting to show well for this trip, and that'll be a running theme throughout this talk. But as we were coming to the end of our time actually on the Delta, there was one species I hadn't seen well that I wanted to finally see, and it was another gull. Slender-billed gulls, which definitely a bit underwhelmed when I finally did get good views of them. Easiest way I can describe it is it's just a slightly larger but paler black-headed gull with just a redder bill. They make a bit of an odd sound, but it's still really nice to see. And by this stage, we're at the end of the Ebro Delta side of this trip, and we're on 110, 120 species. So I mentioned at the start that this trip was split into three parts. So this is, you can see the Ebro Delta running through the centre. My girl Charlotte's got family who live, her grandparents live in a small town, small village just outside Tortosa, which meant that we could have a bit of time just to do some relaxed birding, but it also gave us the opportunity to go elsewhere. So go from some really wetland specific species to more dry but farmland species. So we had some species in mind were little owl, we still hadn't seen cell bunting, corn bunting, serin, just a few things like this. But then also on this screen towards the left-hand side was this really big mountain range that I'd alluded to in some previous posts. And you might be able to see there's a pin here, this red pin, Mount Caro. So outside of the Pyrenees, this is the highest point in Catalonia. And that was going to be very good for us because there were certain species that were classified in the Alpine region, and this was almost their southern range within this region of Spain. So this is our view from my partner's grandparents. So not only a pool, but this is a separate mountain range. So that really big one I've just mentioned is actually behind where I'm stood. So what that meant is that we were basically situated for 3 days in a natural corridor in a valley during peak spring migration, and that wasn't planned at all. And that meant that whilst we're in the pool, and it was still very cold, I'll be honest, beaters were going through, turtle doves, we've seen black kites moving in kettles, booted eagles, even had goshawk, which was actually something that wasn't on my radar, but we had a few of them in this region, and our first Montagu's harriers. And it meant that we got good views also of walking around the local farmland of Sardinian warblers and serins. And we'd had a very chill day with Charlotte's family, and we had the afternoon to ourselves. And Charlotte's granddad goes, "Oh, so where are you guys going to go this afternoon?" And Grandma goes, "Oh, I think, Toby, you should treat Charlotte, go somewhere romantic, have a nice time, whatever. Don't worry, there's no warning or anything for the next slide." And I said, "Oh, I've got the perfect place to go. A rubbish tip." And Charlotte was immediately over the moon, especially knowing that there'd be white storks around, a species we hadn't seen yet very well. And we wanted to get that properly on the list. So you can see there's 2 birds in that photo on the left amongst, which were all yellow-legged gulls. If this was in the UK, that would all be herring gulls. I did actually try and find a herring gull, but soon gave up. I cannot be bothered. I'm on holiday. I don't want to be sifting through too many gulls on a rubbish tip. But there were also ravens, black kites, and our first red kites. And we didn't see too many throughout the duration of this trip. And I don't know if anyone's aware, but red kites are in serious trouble in Spain, especially as a breeding species. And there's a new reintroduction program happening where they're taking chicks or eggs, I'm not sure on the specifics, from the UK, and similar to how they've done osprey reintroductions in the past in the UK, they're putting them in huge, massive cages in, I think, in northern Spain somewhere, to get them habituated to the area and hopefully help reboost the Spanish red kite population. But more on the farmland of the area. So this is a lovely little ancient town called Shirta in the distance here, and this is that mountain range I was on about, but looking a bit more aggressive with that low cloud. Everywhere was littered with these. I'm sure Nigel might have the exact type of fruit. It wasn't an orange; it's a bit of a smaller orange. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but everywhere was littered with these, especially around this town. And off to the left, you might be able to see a bit of reed bed. The Ebro Delta was actually alongside us. And what this meant is we were walking around, we could hear cell buntings calling away. We even had little-ringed plovers actually in areas where there was nothing planted. There were nightingales were calling blackcaps. There was crag martins overhead, red-rumped swallows. Again, all species that are just really, really nice Mediterranean birds you'd love to see. And little owls. And that was our third owl species of the trip, just on an abandoned building. There was a pair of them sitting up there nicely. But then we came to our final day of being in this area before we headed up north towards the steppe region. And we decided we were going to go up this really tall mountain that I'd mentioned, Mount Caro. and I had a list of about 10-15 species. I thought this is our only chance on the trip to see them. We need to get them. So I was very strategic on our points. Some of you might remember or have any copies of the Gosney guide. So he did DVDs, but he also did really thin paperback books. I've misplaced mine. I had mine here earlier, but he has one for the Catalonia region, and he mentioned about this exact route we were taking. And if you stop off at this point, you'd get woodlark. Got that, and pretty much straight away. Oh, why is it not working? Oh, it's jumped ahead. And then as we worked our way up, you had griffon vultures showing fantastically well, almost at eye level. But when you get to the top, one of the key things was it said you can see alpine accenta, and this is a species that I'd only seen in Romania, up in the Transylvanian mountains. Seen one in the UK as well. Species that Charlotte hadn't seen, and despite it being quite dull looking, apologies for any people who like accentas. She was like, right, really want to see alpine accenta. That's one of the top birds I want to see on this trip. We just need to make sure we have good visibility. I was like, yeah, no worries. We'll go up all the way up. We'll see what we can see. This is us when we got to the summit. That is about visibility of 50 meters of fog at the very top. You could not see a damn thing. So our chances of seeing alpine accenta were slim. And even looking on eBird, the last record around the end of March, start of April in this region was actually 2023, and there'd been two records since that before we arrived, and it had been about 18 months since the last one. So our hopes weren't good. And Charlotte being part Welsh is something I'm starting to realise. I'm not sure what it is with you Welsh people, but she has some weird Welsh luck by saying things and they kind of just happen. And she goes, "Oh no, it's fine. Don't worry. We'll walk back to the car, and there'll be an alpine accenta feeding under the car." And there was. There's no easy way of putting it. I had to eat my hat because I did not believe her at all. And that was taken in thick fog, and that was more of a record shot than anything. She had the biggest grin on her face. But because of this low cloud, it meant that other birds were just landing anywhere they could because they just could not navigate. And this western black-eared wheatear was in the middle of a conifer plantation on a fence post. It was as if you're walking through the middle of Newborough Forest, and instead of on the dunes there being a wheatear, this was in the centre. And as you can see, it's absolutely soaking wet. This was a lifer for me. This was definitely not the habitat or the experience I thought I'd be getting at seeing western black-eared wheatears. But as soon as we moved out of the cloud and slightly lower, this was the view that we were getting. So this is again in that mountain range, and off towards the right, you can actually start to see the valley and peeking up towards the other side, and you can see that corridor where the birds are moving through. And we stuck around this area because there's a few species that we wanted to see a bit better, including griffon vultures, but also rock bunting, a bird that I've missed elsewhere abroad. And even in this region, there were so few rock bunting records, but I think that's just down to people not reporting them or using other platforms to report them. So we had a little scan, and we were having griffon vultures not only fly at eye level, but even fly below us. For those who get vertigo, it was not the place to be because we kind of were dangling off 400-meter drops. That's not something I've told my mum yet. I'm not sure she'd like it. Hopefully she's not hearing me from the other room. But one of the other birds I'd said I really wanted to see was rock bunting. And despite waiting at this vantage point for about 20 minutes in the end, and we were pushed for time because we wanted to head further north. I had other plans on the way. I said, right, let's just, if we don't get this, then that's fine. We've had a good day. We get in the car, and Charlotte's like, it's fine, we'll get one on the drive down. We didn't get one, we got two. And once again, just manifesting these species. And not only did we get rock bunting, it was an amazing male, this one in particular, and it was right by the car. Oddly, it seemed to have a injured left foot, but this was just taken. I was the one doing the driving, so my window pulled down, and it was just up in a tree perched next to us. And again, a bird that we thought we're not going to get because time was against us. We soon got. As we dropped down this mountain, we then started to head north towards Leda, and thankfully that was just one road all the way. And I mentioned about this Gosney guide. Within there, it mentions about a lay-by, which is good for Benelli's eagle. And looking on eBird and whatever, very few Benelli's eagle records, especially in recent times. But I thought it's a nice stopover, so we'll see what it's like. pulled over, instantly had a bit of a scare with a lorry, with our hire car. Thank goodness I had fully comp insurance on the car, and I'll also get onto that a bit later. But western subalpine warblers were showing well, and as soon as we started looking to the sky, black kite, griffin vultures were everywhere, a few common buzzards with crag martins and a blue rock thrush up on the cliff top singing away. And again, Charlotte was the one. I actually did some birding, and this actually seems like Charlotte did the birding. I was actually looking for the Benelli's eagle, and she was looking the other way. And she said, "Oh, there's a booted eagle, but it looks a bit odd." And we'd already seen quite a few pale booted eagles initially, so she'd got her eye in with them. And I turned around, and I instantly alarm bells started ringing, and it was an Egyptian vulture, a bird that, because we weren't hitting the Pyrenees, was not on my radar at all that we were going to see, but by all means was definitely a great addition to the list. And bear in mind, this is only within 5 minutes of being in this lay-by. We'd already accumulated a good few species. And then the most horrendous squawking comes over from above us. And it was a pair of Benelli's eagles displaying above us from this lay-by. And they were around for about 10 minutes. Then they departed their ways, and we didn't see them again. And a really good way of telling Benelli's eagle apart is these really big secondaries. I don't know if you can see in this top right image, the right-hand bird, it almost looks like the wing gets bigger as it gets closer towards the towards the body of the bird before going back, and that's just where they have these elongated secondaries, and that's quite a distinctive feature of Benelli's eagle. And again, this is a species I'd missed abroad and was one of the ones I really wanted to see, but I'd kept my expectation low because, I mean, the chances of seeing a Benelli's eagle, let alone having a pair display above you at a random lay-by, it was not on the list. So we were absolutely chuffed. And then by mid-afternoon, this then brought us on to our final stop. So this is the steppe area. So at the north here, it's slightly covered by some of these pins, but that is Lleida. And that's a very Catalonian heavy speaking, or Catalan speaking town or city within Catalonia. And then you only have to go about an hour north, and then you're really in the foothills of the Pyrenees. But where we wanted to base ourselves was actually south of this city in this steppe area. You can see this, what looks to be quite an arid area. And all the research I'd done is that it looked really, really arid, and it was going to be like birding a desert at times. But about 3 weeks before we arrived, they'd had quite a lot of rain, more than, well, an unseasonal amount of rain. What that meant is this region was in bloom. All the crops, but this is like how farming used to be in Britain, where there was no real machinery. It was all done by hand or really old or horse or cart. And that meant that there were loads of corn buntings and species like that. And I'll get onto them. But it wouldn't be a Spanish trip without visiting another rubbish tip. And this time we had a kettle of about 250 black kites. And because we were that bit further north and inland, the temperature really rose to about 27, 28 degrees. And I'm all right with temperature until it gets to that height, then it starts to struggle a bit. But loads and loads of black kites, and as I mentioned, corn buntings were everywhere. And the beauty of, there's just loads of tracks. You could just drive in your car and use your car as a hide, basically. There was no need to get out unless you needed to scope anything or get a better view and go for a bit of a walk. It got actually to the point where, I can't believe I'm saying this, we actually got sick of hearing corn buntings. You'd hear like this slight call of something, and you think, oh, what's that? And you're like, oh no, it's just another corn bunting. I estimate in a day we were hearing about 200 corn buntings. I'm not sure you could even do that in the UK now, maybe in some parts of Kent, which is a real shame, but fantastic to see these birds so well. But then two species, one of them I've already mentioned this evening, that were very high on my list, as this is a family that I really love, and that's the wheatears. And this region is where it's known for western black-eared wheatears. A stunning male, was one of many we saw, but we timed this trip well because we arrived just within a week of the first males arriving. So we knew that the males are going to be really highly territorial, and they're going to be showing really well, and that they did. Can't say the same for black wheatears, which are actually resident, and a bird that I really, really wanted to see. And whilst I did manage this photo, they were really, really elusive. This bird was actually up on a car park, and we walked down this path. It was about couple hundred meters to actually get around and below to get a better view, and we just could not find this bird. We even went back a second time, and we had a similar view to this, but he just would not play ball. But I've mentioned a few times about using eBird, and I don't know how well people in this call, I'm sure some people do, and some of the people might use BirdTrack, which is absolutely fine, by the way. But from a European or global standpoint, I find eBird is a fantastic tool. I could even give a separate talk on the ins and outs of using eBird. But as you might be able to tell from what's written into the species there, probably our #1 target for this entire trip was eagle owl, a species I'd love to see. And obviously you see them if you go to a hawk and owl event anywhere. But the beauty with eBird is you can actually, as long as the species isn't sensitive, so that includes stuff like tengmalms, hawk owl, you're allowed just to give similar species of the same family. But you can type them in, and what this shows is all eagle owl sightings between March and April ever that have been put onto eBird. So the difference is you can see these smaller, just generic plain pins. So they are pins that people have just made their own pin. But then if you have like a birding hotspot, then that gets created into a pin. You can do more with a hotspot, like look at target species, see what photos have been taken at that place. But as you can tell, there is quite a lot to go at for eagle owl, and to compare that, this is all eagle owl sightings this year in the exact same region. And the red pins you can see, very similar to how BirdTrack works, that's sightings in the last 30 days. A few of these are actually our sightings that no one has reported since. So I'd spent close to a month purely doing eagle owl research before we went, and I have on my phone a Google Maps, almost a mini map in itself, of about 15 to 20 eagle owl spots, including nest sites, where to view the nest sites from, because most of them obviously from a track, you don't be getting anywhere near close to an eagle owl nest, and where roosting adults were likely seen. But then even where it wasn't easy to work out exactly where they were, I was finding photos where the bird could be seen, getting up Google Maps Street View and exactly trying to pinpoint, yes, that's the exact crevice that owl was in. Some people might say that's overkill in terms of the work you do, but it paid off. This was the very first site, and I hadn't told Charlotte that there were eagle owls here. She got out the car and gone for a walk, and I said, I was just going to go and scan the cliffs. And I instantly found the roosting adult, presumably the female, on the left here, sat in this little crevice, keeping out of the sun. But I'd actually seen photos from a few days before that the chicks were here, and it took me a while to find them. I had to move my position along this dirt track, and there they were. There was actually 4 chicks. You can see 3 heads, and there's actually fluff of the bum of a 4th bird. And I was able to have a look after our trip, and these actually all fledged. And in this region, it's heavily rabbits, tons and tons of rabbits that they're preying on. So there's a lot of food. And what this also means is that they're not as eagle owls in this region aren't as territorial. Their territories are quite small because there's such the food availability. They haven't got to be fighting with one another. There's so much food to go at. We were both ecstatic with these views, but I knew deep down that I'd found another site on previous research that I knew we're going to get better views of eagle owl, but I was keeping my mouth shut. And I'm sure I'll let you guys decide if that was better views of eagle owl. So this was a known male that roosted in an abandoned building on the edge of a small town, and we rocked up, and Charlotte got a glimpse of this window. She said, there's something in that window. And I'd parked out of the way so you couldn't then turn around and look back. It was quite strategic with it all. And she goes, that wasn't what I think it was it? I said, well, I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it was. And she got around the corner, and there it was. And we watched this bird for about an hour. He just sat there giving gentle hoots out to the valley, where I knew the rough area the nest was, but there's no need to even go and attempt to go and even try and looking for it. Views like this. And just as it went dusk, he flew out. Annoyingly, he was looking away in this photo, and he went out into the night, presumably to hunt more rabbits. Just such an impressive bird, and by far the bird of the trip for us. And I've mentioned earlier about this region, about how lush it was and how green it was. These 2 photos kind of depict what it was like. There wasn't arid at all. Wildflower meadows everywhere. And on the left, these were the tracks that we were using. And at some points, my hire car was on 3 wheels as I was getting down some of the slopes. But that allowed us to be off the beaten track in areas where not only there were no other birders, there were just no people at all. And this photo on the right is actually that original eagle owl nest that I'd mentioned, and had those record shots of, and they were just roosting, or the nest was just in these in the shelter of these ledges. And then we'd stayed the night, and then the following morning, this was going to be our full day on the steppe, so we wanted to make sure we made the most of it. And one bird that it's definitely in northern Spain when it comes to larks, is very high on most people's lists, is Dupont's lark. And this abandoned, what's the word I'm looking for, airfield, which has now been taken over by the local nature conservation trust, is the last remaining place in Catalonia to go and see Dupont's lark. If you just go a little bit further west towards Aragon, sounds like somewhere out of Lord of the Rings, there's a better population of Dupont's lark where you also get good views. But given we weren't going to that region, this was our only chance to get this bird. And sadly, we never actually saw Dupont's, we only heard. For those that don't know, Dupont's lark is an extremely skulky bird. If you even get a glimpse of one, it's good. It's almost like seeing a bittern. They just don't happen. We just about heard Dupont's lark. But as you can see from this habitat, it looks fantastic, and it was filled to the brim with calandra larks, Thekla larks, skylarks, little bustard, Iberian grey shrike, pin-tailed sandgrouse, Iberian green woodpecker. Almost this place was probably the highlight for me, and we got there before dawn, and I was quite confident I'd learnt the difference between calandra and Thekla lark. And then I opened the window. We stayed in the car, but just had the windows open, and it's almost overwhelming trying to pick out anything, especially trying to pick out little bustard. If anyone knows that call, it's like a little click. And imagine 50 skylarks singing at you, and then you've got to hear a little click in between them. It was quite difficult at times. But I mentioned the larks. Calandra lark showed incredibly well, just sat on some of the posts. Like a really big chunky lark with that massive big breast band and a really thick chunky bill. And then Thekla lark, which is very similar to not only skylark, but over in that region you get more crested larks. Main difference here between this and a crested lark is it's got a slightly thicker bill, a thicker but shorter bill. That's probably the key difference. Apart from the song is completely different. Iberian grey shrikes, I'd already previously alluded to, never showed well, but from what I gather, they can actually be quite a shy species. Interestingly, Iberian grey shrikes are actually more closely related to loggerhead shrikes in America than they are great grey shrikes in the UK, or that we get wintering here. I've not really researched into that much, but that's quite a baffling taxonomic fact. And then a little bustard, and that's probably the best view we got. And for anyone that's tried to see a little bustard, it's probably about as best as you're going to get. And then we moved further around to a slightly wooded area, and we had fantastic views of this black kite. Quite a dull-looking bird with the eye looks quite brown. And on a bit of research I've done, I think this is a second-year bird. Usually, what happens in quite a few species, the older the bird gets, the eye gets a bit brighter. And then I'm going to put this up. Anyone knows what that means? Not safe for work. And we were watching this black kite, as I've just shown you that photo. Really happy with the views we were getting, and soon realised that it was a female. And you might be asking how he knew it was a female. Was because within about a minute, this was happening. Just incredible in terms of a spectacle to see. Definitely not something it's not on anyone's bucket list, but just to be able to witness something as cool as that, watching raptors mate, was epic. And it within a flash, it was done. I'm sure she was a lucky lady. But there were many black kites in this region. And again, we just timed this trip perfectly with when these birds were getting ready for their breeding season. And elsewhere within the woodlands, there were sirens singing away, as they always are when you go anywhere in Europe. Hopefully one day they'll be a bit more common here in the UK. It's personally a bird I've still not seen. And as we ended on our final evening, before we headed back the next day. We thought, right, let's make the most of it. We really enjoyed that eagle owl the other day, so let's have our evening. Let's go and do that again. So after we just escaped the midday heat, we went back out late afternoon and visited that eagle owl nest that I showed you the photos of first, those record shots. We couldn't see the adults, and the other chicks were probably hunkered down much further because we couldn't see them either. But this one was keeping a close watch on us. But then as we drove through the country tracks, looking for the next spot to go and look at, just picked up a raptor. And we'd seen quite a lot of marsh harriers. I think that's a species I've not actually mentioned at all this trip. We probably saw 200 or 300 marsh harriers over the course of our trip, mostly in the delta, but also in this steppe region, I think, because of how lush the vegetation was. Raptors were just moving through and making the most of it. So I'd had Montagu's harriers on my mind. We'd only seen one previously in the delta, and I've never seen a male. And I was pretty happy with these views. So we had 3 birds. We had 1 ringtail and 2 males, including this bird on the right that would just come within 30 meters of the car, feeding away in the evening light, and we were dead quiet. We dare not say a word. And our background was covered with Iberian yellow wagtails. There were quail singing everywhere, corn buntings, of course, and hunting Montagu's harriers. Sadly, a thing that will that ever become common in the UK? I don't think so. Obviously, a pair bred this year in England for the first time in 6 years, but just fantastic views to see. But then we thought, this has been good, but this is time that I hadn't allocated. Let's go and have a look at these eagle owls and make the most of it. And so as we arrived, and you can see in this left-hand photo, the bird just sat in that same window that I showed that photo of earlier. And he did the same thing he did the previous night. We watched him. So that's just taken on my phone, by the way, just to give you a reference of how close we were. And he was more than happy sitting there. It's a roost spot he's used for several years. And he flew out a different way when he left his roost. And we both looked at each other and we said, oh, he's just gone and roosted by the road. And we just let that sink for a minute. We thought, he's just gone and sat by the road. So we quickly got in our car and drove around to see if we could see him again. And Charlotte suddenly shouts, there he is, plus a load of Welsh explicits. I'm still yet to learn what they actually were. And you might be able to see there's a small dot on the edge of the crag. And this, what I'm about to show you, is probably the highlight of the entire trip. Fantastic views of this Eurasian eagle owl. And he sat there for 5 minutes. And he just sat there. He turned his head. He looked. He hooted away. You could hear the female also in the background elsewhere. He even turned to even look at us a bit better, check us out. So we did actually have to get out the car because I could not get a view, and there was no way I was going to stay in the car buckled up when getting a view like this. And within 5 minutes, he then flew further down the valley. We didn't see him again. It got too dark. So bear in mind, this photo is taken at about 8 o'clock at night, so it's getting pretty dark. I've had to lift it quite a bit to get any colour out. And it will take a lot beating an experience of eagle owl like that anywhere in the world. A few species that I've also mentioned previously is corn buntings were everywhere, and a bird everyone here should be familiar with is chough, or red-billed chough. It was very weird seeing these in heavily arid areas of cattle farmland, basically, in this steppe region. I'm used to seeing these feeding around South Stack, not in the middle of a steppe region of Spain, and they were quite happy in this area, feeding away and giving quite good views, better views than I've definitely had at South Stack and other places in Anglesey. And a bird that's been mentioned a few times this evening already, but hoopoes. It wouldn't be a Mediterranean trip without seeing some hoopoes. So these were taken at the end of our trip. We had left the steppe region, and before our flight back from Barcelona, we had a few hours to kill, and I'd found a nature reserve that was near the airport. Those who follow me on social media might know where this is about to go. And we left most of our stuff in the car. We hadn't even opened the boot, to be honest, and the parcel shelf was over it. We just took our bins with us, and I couldn't be bothered to bring the scope out with me, or no need for the thermal either. So just the essentials in our pockets, or most of the essentials. And we came back to the car, and there was a few people looking at the car. Bear in mind, this is a small little car park about 5 minutes from Barcelona Airport. And I thought, I've got a flat tire or something typical. No, it was actually quite a bit worse than that. So what had happened was, well, as you can see, our hire car got broken into. And they'd actually managed to disable the electronics. What you might be able to see in this right-hand photo, that looks to be a bit of wood. They found a wood and smashed a window in the back rear left side to then get the handle of the door and open it. And as you can see, they've left some stuff, but they took our main luggage. And ironically, my scope was on that tripod. And as you can see in that photo, it's just no longer there. They'd also taken my thermal, but they'd taken all our luggage. And the one time over the whole trip, I hadn't told, she'll hate me for saying this, the one time on the whole trip, I hadn't told Charlotte, make sure you got your passport. What was in her luggage bag? Her passport. So this turned into what was a fantastic trip, turned into quite a nightmare, having to deal with Spanish police. Anyone who's dealt with Spanish police, I'm sure you can sympathise. They are not the easiest to deal with. I'm awful at speaking other languages. I do work for a German company, by the way. And Charlotte could speak very, very little, just enough to get us along. But with having to get an Uber to the airport terminal because of their close proximity, it was the closest police station to where we were. And then the terminal we needed was at a different part of Barcelona airport, so trying to get an Uber for that. I think I spent close to €100 that evening just getting Ubers between the different places. It was quite ridiculous. But as I alluded to, they'd taken Charlotte's passport, and that was the main issue. Thankfully, Charlotte's grandparents only lived about 2 hours south, in the area that I'd shown, and they came to rescue us like damsels in distress. And our 7-night, 8-day trip turned into 12 days because you have to cancel your passport and then declare it through the government website. And then there's a whole deal of trying to get an emergency passport. And if anyone's ever done that, or those who haven't, when you try and apply for emergency passport, they tell you what flight have you booked on. But then if you, a few slides before that, they tell you not to book any flights until you've got an emergency passport. So it was all a bit convoluted. The whole process, I don't wish it on anyone. It was not fun. And yeah, we came back a few days later. Did actually mean we got to add monk parakeet to our trip list because we had to go to the British consulate in Barcelona. So there's a small silver lining to that. It was an extra bird for the trip. So yes, and the scope was actually owned by Zeiss. It wasn't mine. So what happens is I have a load of kit that's loaned by work. So obviously that caused a few problems when I got back. And the reason I'm also bringing this up is about a month and a half ago, I get a call from one of my Dutch colleagues. I was just about to head out and go on the road. And he goes, "You'll never guess what, but we found your scope." Because I'd logged the serial number through the system and it flagged as stolen. It had appeared on Vinted, of all places. So anyone who knows Vinted is very similar to eBay, but it's more used for clothes. And what had happened, and I've put I've made sure to add the user's thing in there so you can all see it. Despite being stolen in Barcelona, it had gone to Madrid, and then someone in the Netherlands had bought it off this guy in Madrid. And when it arrived in the Netherlands, the guy wanted to get it serviced. So he sent it off to Germany, and then that's when it flagged on the system that this is stolen. So obviously, with the whole procedure, we've got it, and it's actually on my way back to me at the moment. But for anyone who doesn't know pricing that well, especially on this scope, so that works out at about 1,900 euros, is about 1,800 pounds. That scope brand new is about £4,000, so that's a hell of a bargain for the guy who originally bought it. Obviously, sadly, he couldn't keep it, but that was a silver lining to that story. And sadly, the thermal hasn't been recovered yet. You never know, but that's a bit of humour to the end of it. But just to finish off, it's been very much a whistle-stop tour on this trip to Spain, and everything in more detail is on eBirds, and I'll happily put the link in after this, or I can give it to Gary and it can be put in for the YouTube link. And also on Cloudbirder, which is a site where you can write trip reports. It's all written there. But as you can see, I originally said that we'd get 130 species in the week. We ended on 193 species. There wasn't much we missed. And then what we missed is because we were too early in the spring season. So we didn't see roller. That was probably the one bird we didn't see that was probably glaringly obvious. but everything we went for, we saw. And I'm yet to go on a trip where everything you see, you get. And that's also part of the hard work that we've done in terms of research, and it does pay off. And I'd also mentioned about I'd been in Spain in the same area in September, and that's just to show when I'd been. And even on the, bear in mind, that's just the Delta alone. In the spring, I had about 125 species in the end. In 6 days there, this autumn, it was 142 species, including the likes of white-tailed lapwing, several pictorial sandpipers, and Pacific golden plover, stuff you wouldn't really expect to see in Spain, buff-breasted sandpipers. But I just want to end by saying people have probably heard of Spain and southern Spain, especially Andalusia and Extremadura. But I would highly recommend, especially for a family holiday, if you have people who aren't as interested in birds, like a nice starter into Mediterranean birding, the Ebro Delta is about as good as it gets. So I hope everyone has enjoyed that whistle stop tour.
We certainly have, Toby. Thank you very much indeed. It was brilliant. I'm sure there'll be a good few questions for you. I'd like to start the ball rolling, if I may. And could you tell me, is that Ebro population of Audouin's gull, is that the largest in the world?
That's a very good question. I don't think it's the largest in the world. I'm fairly sure there are some decent sized populations around on southern Spain. I'm trying to get my geography right, but it's definitely one of the largest. And because it's on the Ebro Delta, I didn't say it's a SPA, so scientific protected area as it is. So it's one of the most important because there is a lot of legislation behind it already in terms of protecting them. So yeah, great bird to see.
It certainly is. Yeah. Is there any evidence of competition from yellow-leg gull?
Yes. Yeah, I think that is also one of the other reasons why they're declining, is the increase in yellow leg gulls and lesser blackbacks.
Right.
So other gull species that are just that little bit bigger.
Yes.
So Audouins are kind of, I'd say, slightly bigger than common gulls for people who haven't seen them, just to get a bit of a reference for size. But yeah, there's definitely some other species counterparting.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions for Toby? Do shout out or leave a message in the chat box.
Hi Toby, great talk as usual, brilliant. I thought it was quite interesting. You saying that they're actually exporting kites from the UK to help repopulate the Spanish kites, because wasn't Spain one of the donor sites for the original ones, along with Sweden for the UK?
Yes, it's funny how it all swings and roundabouts. But it was only it's something that I saw a few weeks ago, so it's fairly new, this Spanish study. But whilst red kites in the UK, most of them are quite resident, a lot of the European population does also migrate a bit. And while Spain does have a lot of migrating few, there's very few that actually breed, and they're declining. And so it's just local people trying to do their bit. So we'll see if it works. Yeah.
Did you know why they're declining?
Presumably climate change. It's just becoming too arid. The way I've always looked at it, black kites are definitely can deal with warmer climates more than red kites can. I think also just the food availability for what they prefer. So yeah, that's as much as I know. I'm sure I should have done more research.
I suppose the problem with that is if it's becoming more arid and they don't like it, they're not going to survive, really, are they?
No, they're probably just moving to France, which I'm sure the Spanish would love to hear. So
yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions? Can you tell us a little bit more about the DuPonts? I mean, it's such a charismatic bird, isn't it?
Yeah.
And its conservation status at the moment.
I think, as far as I'm aware, it's threatened. So there are two separate populations of DuPont's lark, to my knowledge. There's this Spanish population, and then North Africa, mostly in Morocco. Presumably there's birds in like Algeria, but good luck trying to get over there and see them. But they are, how do I describe it? They're like very specific type of habitat. It's very similar to tree sparrows. Tree sparrows in the UK especially, it's got to be right, else they go. And it's very similar for DuPont's lark. And this one site, because it's been managed the way it is, and I think this year, I think they've only had 2 singing males. I don't know if breeding's been confirmed. It's very hard to confirm breeding, and I'm sure it could be a species that could slip away soon, especially from that region. Whilst elsewhere in Spain they're doing well. but especially in Catalonia, that's the only place left.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah. Any other questions for Toby? The rock bunting, that was superb.
Yes.
Nice image. I mean, that was obviously a highlight. Are they doing quite well? How strictly alpine are they, or are they?
It's hard to say on the research that I did, but they definitely seem to like the more mountainous areas. Alpine's probably almost restricting them almost too much. I'm sure you'd find them in some of the foothills like we were in. But I mean, we had those two, and that was despite we put effort in it's probably in the wrong areas. But I think it's like going for any type of bunting. You could search an area for ages, and good luck trying to see it, unless you find them singing. And neither of the ones we had were singing either. So there was just by pure chance. What I will do is I will just in the chat so people can look at it later. That's the eBird trip report, and that's got more photos and audio and more of an in-depth search for anyone.
Thank you very much. That's great. And you mentioned at the beginning with the Ebro Delta the link with the rice paddies and the richness of wetland birds. Is that just simply a chance link?
It definitely used to be a chance link, and because of that's probably one area where agriculture in that region has intensified. Spanish people love their rice with paella, so it's growing. But to counteract some of the natural invertebrates that feed in the rice paddies, they've introduced these crayfish. I can't remember what type. I presume signal. And then they've also got Wells catfish. Whilst the avifauna is fantastic on the Ebro Delta, the fauna altogether is actually in quite a dire state. There's several other. I think there's a crab species as well that's hitched rides from Africa on ferries that are clearly going to like Barcelona or whatever. And they're in the Ebro Delta. So like fish numbers are having a real issue. Whilst there's a lot of catfish, if that's your kind of thing, and the Ebro Delta is great for it, but trying to get other species, it's not as good. But the birds are doing fine because a lot of these water birds are eating these crayfish, and these flooded paddies are absolutely filled to the brim with them. So it's swings and roundabouts. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, we're glad something's benefiting anyway.
I'm going to put this on.
Any other questions?
Can I ask Toby about did I notice that you were actually at the Ebro Festival this September?
Yes.
Yeah. I remember going to the very first one that they had there. It was really quite small at that stage. Is it thriving? Because it was a great do, but very few people really.
It was So I hadn't actually properly mentioned that, but when I went in Spain in September, that was for a work trip. So the Ebro Birding Delta Festival is very similar to Bird Fair, but for anyone who's been to MIGFest, it's more on that kind of level. So I think what they said, they had about 2,000 or 3,000 people attend over the whole 3 days. So compare that to Bird Fair at the moment. I mean, take it with a pinch of salt, but it's about 12,000 at Bird Fair these days. It didn't help with the weather. I said I didn't do well in hot climates, but it was about 30 degrees, 80% humidity, and no wind. And being stuck in a little tent marquee was not great fun, I'll be honest. But I was birding whilst I was working, so I can't complain too much. It was definitely on a much smaller scale. But it's probably somewhere I'll end up going back. It's a good little festival.
And it was held where you showed the tower that you climbed up. It was that one there, was it?
So that's a different tower.
Was it?
I think it's probably held the same place that you're on about, where there was like a like almost like a observatory, big concrete plinth, and that it's still up there around the salt pans where the flamingos are. Was that where?
Well, it was around the salt pans.
It's in the same area, which is great.
Really excellent.
Yeah, for testing optics, it's excellent because people just look at all the flamingos and Caspian terns and Temming stints. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, very good. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Great. Well, Toby, it's my pleasure to thank you on Bird Group's behalf this evening for a splendid talk. I loved it for lots of reasons, and I mean one of them was the starting with the wetlands, and I guess anytime one goes abroad and sees the same habitat but in a different latitude or slightly different geographical circumstance, it's a lovely different benchmark as to what might be possible back home
Oh, yeah.
here. And to get those sort of numbers roosting that you were mentioning, great white egrets and cattle egrets and black crowned night herons, is phenomenal to think, yep, that might actually be possible in places in Britain in the future. And that's what we should be aiming for and set our aims as high as that. But that lovely swap over of cattle egrets with black crowned night herons
it's
really
definitely
must have been
something that
amazing
Horse
to
Digger
see.
could have in a few years'
Yeah,
time.
yeah, that would be fantastic. Um, you covered such a nice range of habitats, really, from remote mountaintops to rubbish tips and
Yeah,
everything in between, proving that they were all worth visiting. And to get the best out of an area, that's what you've got to do. And putting in the research pre-trip is very important too. And thank you for highlighting eBird, which I think my generation towns perhaps ignore, but is clearly such a valuable tool
it
for
it's something that is. I'm also quite personally attached to eBird.
yeah.
Zeiss sponsor it, not that matters or anything, but it's a tool that is becoming more and more popular. And Europe, from a European standpoint, the UK and Spain are definitely the leaders in terms of people who use it. eBird is Cornell, so it's American based, and it's obviously a huge American following. But also South America, I mean, worldwide, eBird is hugely
That's
used.
how I find my information out.
So and it was nice to have the close encounters of the owl kind. I mean, each of those was a lovely story about finding and eventually photographing each of the short-eared owl, Scops owl, long-eared owl, and finally the Eurasian eagle owl. What a picture at the end. That was a good way to finish. Fantastic. It really was. Lovely to see a place too where there's good numbers and good variety of species that are declining in Britain. Again, it's really encouraging, but it also reminds us of what we're missing and what we should again be aiming for with things like corn buntings. So much to take away from that, and you and Charlotte make a great team, and I'm sure she's already looking forward to the next trip
Yeah, that's already
with
planned.
you. And yeah, good luck with your new role with Zeiss.
Thank you.
I hope it really works out well. And thank you for putting together a very entertaining talk, great commentary,